The next thing we wanted to talk about was Donald J. Trump's executive order on, let me read the title exactly here, Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government. I would imagine sponsored by, co-authored by, shaped by our good friend David Sachs. I say that with sarcasm. I wanted to read a couple of the clauses from this executive order because I thought it was really quite interesting. They're saying that they want AI in the government that follows the following principles. Truth seeking. LLM shall be truthful in responding to user prompts seeking factual information or analysis. LLMs shall prioritize historical accuracy, scientific inquiry, and objectivity, and shall acknowledge uncertainty when reliable information is incomplete or contradictory. And ideological neutrality. LLMs shall be neutral, non-partisan tools that do not manipulate responses in favor of ideological dogma, such as DEI. Developers shall not intentionally encode partisan or ideological judgments into LLM outputs unless those judgments are prompted by or otherwise readily accessible to the end user. I actually found those two clauses, which are really the main two clauses that enshrine what they mean by objectivity and truth-seeking, or at least what they enshrine as preventing woke AI. I actually found those to be surprisingly simple, inoffensive, and clear-eyed about what you would want from an LLM. I think the problem comes as follows. Number one, liberals and conservatives don't see their own humps. They don't see their own bias. And so defining what bias is difficult. We talked about this in the last episode. And so I think some might say, well, OpenAI is entirely and pure and free of bias, and I think others would say that's not true. I think there are many on the right that would say X or XAI or Grok or whatever the hell is free of bias, and I think that's objectively not true. And so the people claiming or calling for bias are the loudest, are the ones injecting the most bullshit into the process. And these guys are entirely untrustworthy and craven, power-hungry liars. What I'm trying to say is the text of the executive order, I think, is actually very clear-eyed and fairly fair. I think the implementation by these people being the White House and the leadership in power, belies or betrays the principles enshrined in this particular executive order. What do you make of this, Yaniv?
Okay, so I think you're giving the text too much credit. All I can say is it could be worse, but that's actually pretty bad. And, its ideological stars shine through, and also its naivety at best shines through. But I think the problem is I'm not a deconstructionist on this stuff, right? Like you're sort of, if you look at the text and pretend that it's being written in good faith, it's clearly not. Like if you talk about truth seeking, I would have to say that this White House and President Donald J. Trump, and I'm not saying this partisan, I mean, I am partisan, but I think there is a huge body of verified facts that Donald J. Trump simply denies. He is the least truth-seeking president, I would say, in US history, and that's the sort of thing he would say, by the way, ever. The least truth-seeking president ever, right?
Bigly. He's a bigly liar.
That's right. He's the biggest liar in the history of humanity ever.
Yeah.
And the idea that this is some sort of good faith attempt to combat biases of all sorts in LLMs is just absolutely laughable. Truth is not important to these people. And so when they say that they want truth seeking, but then in the same breath, they talk about DEI. What's the quote in this? It says, one of the most pervasive and destructive of these ideologies is so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, is DEI perfect? Has there been overreach? Yes. Is it one of the most destructive ideologies ever when we've got Grok calling itself Mecha Hitler and wanting to bring back the Nazis? No, not even close. This is clearly a crusade to call out DEI, to use the word woke, which has like clearly been coded to mean from the right wing, anything that the left wing says that we don't like. That shows that there is not an shred of credibility that this thing is about truth seeking, that it's about eliminating bias. This is about putting the finger on the scale in a very serious way and saying the ideology of the people in power is the ideology that should be presented through these tools. And that, my friend, is fascist thinking. And this thing I cannot read as anything other than an attempt to sway these people, these providers of the models from the White House, a very powerful place, to say the sorts of things that are aligned with the ideology of the current regime that is totalitarian, that is fascist. And by the way, I'm not an expert on the US Constitution, but it sure sounds like it goes against the First Amendment. So what the hell?
I fundamentally agree with you about these people. I guess my point is that the specific words of the specific clauses that refer to the truth-seeking aspect of the LLMs that they're claiming that they want, I would find it to be relatively inoffensive and relatively something that I would want LLMs to aspire to, other than the specific reference to DEI, which I think is unnuanced and is a cudgel that they're using. I think that it's actually a fairly good aspiration. But as we're both alluding to, Yaniv, this is a sort of form of duck speak or doublethink from 1984, right? Where they use certain words like freedom, but they mean the opposite, which is basically tyranny through controlling, through, firing judges and stacking courts and prosecuting your political enemies and, and lying about the Epstein files. These people lie. They lie all the time. If they're speaking, they're lying. I'm saying the words here taken on face value, I think are relatively worth aspiring to, but I don't trust the people who wrote them and I don't trust the people who are going to implement them. So, yeah, I think we're both in enthusiastic agreement about that. Again, I mentioned this maybe last episode or a couple episodes ago. If you want to know what's happening in the world and you feel torn or confused or bewildered, one of the ways you can very clearly demystify some of the things going on right now is to ignore the words and the rhetoric coming out of people's mouths and just observe their behavior and the outcomes of their behavior. The outcomes of their behavior is their intent. It is their intent. If people are being harmed and civil liberties are being taken away, that is their intent. The cruelty is the point. If people are being slaughtered or starved, that is their intent. Ignore the rhetoric, pay attention to the outcomes. People are not stupid, they're not ineffective, they're achieving exactly what they want. That's a very simple way, a very simple hack to understand what's going on in the world. All right, those are our thoughts about rhetoric versus action. What do you guys think? Is this a well-meaning and well-needed guardrail for AI moving into the future, or is it a bunch of doublethink and duck speak from the Orwellian government in power in the US today? Jump in the comments and let us know your thoughts.